it just doesn't matter that much for most people. What am I talking about? Trying to reposition assets in order to hide them, quote unquote, from the FAFSA or financial aid forms. I've talked about this in some of my prior podcast episodes, but recently I've had a number of meetings with people who have asked me this question, essentially this question, and asking my opinion about potential strategies that they could do with their money or real estate or other investments that they may own. And in each case, these families had pretty high income, well into the six figures, and they had substantial assets. So good for them, right? They did a good job of saving and building that up. But their question to me in each of these cases was, well, what if I took all this money and I did something with it so that I did not have to report it on the financial aid forms? Would that help? And in each case, I had to tell them, yes, you could do that, but it doesn't actually help because it doesn't lower your SAI or your family contribution enough to where you qualify for need-based financial aid. Now, that doesn't say, that's not to say that their student wouldn't qualify for merit scholarships or whatever, right? That's a separate issue. But for need-based financial aid, it just wasn't going to be enough. And honestly, in one of the instances, the family had a lot of investment real estate, like condos, houses, and stuff that they rent out. So hiding or repositioning those assets are a lot more difficult because there's so much more paperwork involved, right? It's one thing if you had a bunch of money in a savings account and you gave it to someone else, right? Like you gave it to your neighbor. Now, legally, there are like gift tax rules involved and things like that. But it's much easier to hand your neighbor a pile of money or hand your neighbor a check, to reposition that money so that you don't have to report it on your financial aid form. It's a whole nother ball game when you have real assets, like, what are called real assets, like houses and things like that. Like you can't, just give the keys to your neighbor because that doesn't mean that they own it. Right? Especially in the case of houses, you have to change the deed around and file that at the registry of deeds. And there's a lot more paperwork and complication involved, and you want to get attorneys involved. And, it takes a lot more time versus just sort of handing somebody a bunch of cash. So in these instances, it just did not make a lot of sense. Again, I remind everyone that income matters more than assets. So I'm not saying that these strategies would never work, okay? But the reality is that for the vast majority of families, or at least the vast majority of families that I've seen, repositioning assets in order to qualify for need-based financial aid or to qualify for more need-based financial aid just really doesn't make that big of a difference. Financial aid is driven primarily on income. Unless you're going to tell your boss that you're going to drop your own pay down to zero, right, by taking a massive pay cut, or you're going to quit your job so that you don't have income or something like that, it just doesn't matter, right? And most people, you have a family support, you have a household, your lifestyle. Most people aren't going to say to their boss, hey, please cut my pay by 90%. Or you know what? I'm just going to quit my job so my kid can qualify for financial aid. Yeah, we might starve to death because we won't have money to buy food, but by golly, I'm going to quit my job to qualify for financial aid. Most people don't do that. Anyway, just something to keep in mind as you go through this process, income matters more than assets. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.